Welcome to the Julia and Gino podcast, where business meets family. We explore what the entrepreneurial life looks like from a family perspective. We are your hosts, Julia and Gino Barbaro. Hey everyone, this is Julia Barbaro, host of the Julia and Gino Show. I'm here with the co-founder of Jake and Gino, my husband and co-host, Gino Barbaro.
Hey, Joel, how you doing?
Hey, I am amazing today.
Full transparency, we're doing a podcast on apologies, and I don't think I really need to watch this. I could skip this show. I think my wife is the one who's going to really benefit from this one. So for all of you out there, today we're welcoming Dr. Jennifer Thomas to the show. Dr. Jen enjoys teaching what to say when challenging conversations arise. See, I don't have any challenging conversations with you, so I'm okay. She's a clinical psychologist, consultant, TEDx speaker, and co-author of the 5 Apology Languages. She has helped others break through barriers and build respect, grow their businesses by apologizing the smart way, and trade in tired excuses for honesty, trust, and joy. Welcome to the show, Dr. Jennifer Thomas.
Well, thank you. And I'm looking forward to our conversation today.
This is going to be super amazing. And my husband's making fun of himself secretly. I don't know if
absolutely. Every day I go through at least 3 or 4 apologies a day. That's just for the norm. But if you can't make fun of yourself, right? And if you take yourself too seriously, how are you going to apologize to others? I think that's the first big lesson. But Dr. Jennifer, how did you meet Dr. Chapman, and how did you come up with this? I wouldn't want to say revolutionary. It's been out there, but you had the genius to package it all together for somebody to be able to consume it in 3 or 4 hours and radically change their life.
Well, yeah, we do believe that these are 2 essentials for healthy relationships. You've got his 5 love languages, and then the new thing that we're talking about now are the 5 apology languages, because we know if you want to keep your love tank full, you've got to also handle the offenses that inevitably pop up. I know I'm trying to be perfect. I'm trying not to offend people, but we inevitably do. And so we have to have a way to remove the barriers those mistakes, offenses, or conflicts create, so that we can really enjoy being in relationship with the people who are closest to us. Now, you asked about the story and how this came about. I had actually met Gary Chapman through some networking I did when I moved to North Carolina a number of years ago. And then the idea about apologies being similar to love languages actually came to me in my own marriage. JT and I were having a rough end of week evening, and I made a mistake, and I said, I'm sorry. And I thought that was going to be it and we were going to move on. But to JT, that wasn't a complete apology. It almost didn't even register for him that I had apologized. And so, it's hard when you're married to a psychologist because they don't drop things. So we dug into it. And I realized that the reason that it didn't register on his radar screen was that he wanted to hear something different from me. And so I'd like to invite you and your listeners to think about, what might JT have wanted to hear besides, I'm sorry? And the answer in his case was, I was wrong. That would have hit the nail on the head for him. And I was willing to say it. So I said, okay, well, that's what I meant. I was wrong. And I was just surprised by what a difference it made for him, because to me, they were kind of synonyms. But to him, I think because of the acceptance of responsibility that comes with saying I was wrong, it made a huge difference. And so I literally wrote down, remember when you're apologizing to JT to use the phrase, I was wrong. I wish this guy had come with an instruction book, but he didn't. And we had been married 10 years at that point. And I thought, this really could help us get unstuck more quickly if I can just put this into practice. It was a simple linguistic thing in my mind, but it made me curious about what other things people might be waiting to hear you say or see you do when you're apologizing. But I saw right away that it was kind of like the love languages, where people have an expectation that you may or may not meet. And the problem is you kind of check it off and move on, like, good, I did this thing. And you don't realize that they're over there thinking, and they're waiting for you to either express love or express your apology in a way that's going to show up for them. And as I said, hit the nail on the head. So I took the idea to Gary Chapman. We talked it over. He said, this is really interesting. I've never thought about the similarity here, but I can see what you mean. And so we began some research looking into what people want to hear in apologies. And I promise we weren't looking for 5, but we actually came up with 5 different things that count for people when you're saying my bad.
Mm-hmm. So psychologists, Dr. Thomas, I'm going to make a note of this. Psychologists and Italians are very similar. Italians, we don't forget anything. It's just steel trap up here. It's a curse of ours. We cannot forgive. And it's one of those things that I think a lot of Italians, I'm speaking from experience, can benefit. Julia, your question, please.
Yeah. It's interesting that you told the story about your husband, and I'm going to tell it from the other side of being, that person who is being apologized to. And that's, if my husband says, I'm sorry, I get what but at the same time, before I read this book, all I could think was, like you said, that's not good enough. Something's wrong. Something doesn't feel right. I know you're genuinely sorry. I knew that, but it doesn't feel right. I don't know what I want. And that was, so it was hard to explain there was something wrong until I read this book. I'm like, here it is. Here's my answer. Oh. And I thought, okay, this is what we can work with. And so now, we have, like I said, we have 6 children and they're all very different. They're all looking, we went through the love languages with them. And let me tell you, it is exhausting. The 5 love languages is exhausting, especially when you're using it with a lot of other people. Just you and your spouse is one thing, but now all of a sudden you're reaching out to everyone you're there. Like, holy cow, what was it again? What did you love? Right, but then now the apology is something on top of that. And wow, this is so beneficial. And I just want to point this out, everyone listening, if you're a parent, yes, it's amazing with your spouse, but wow, can you connect with your children?
And I have something to say. You said that I didn't know what I wanted. If you don't know what you want, how am I supposed to know what you want?
And so that's where the problems
come in. It wasn't my fault. Thank God. That's all I know. It's
you
not my fault.
Apologize for that because you didn't know either.
Good.
But it was such an eye opener, this book. And I really encourage people to read it and figure out what you're looking for. Because sometimes I'm sorry is not what you want. So that's why, Dr. Jennifer, can you explain to us, with a little bit of detail, each of the 5 apology languages?
Yes, indeed. And I'll do you one better. In addition to explaining them, I'm going to let you know the percentage of people who most want to hear that phrase. And this is some newer information we have based on 40,000 people who've taken our free apology language online.
Excellent.
So I've covered generally our first 2 apology languages. So saying I'm sorry is expressing regret. And we found that an equal percentage of people want that and want our next one, accepting responsibility or saying I was wrong. And we found that 37% of people want to hear each of those. So chances are it's about 35 times 2, 70 some percent of people will be satisfied if you say both of those things to them.
Let's stop right there. I'm sure my wife does not fall in that bucket because she's just a unique individual. So let's go on the remainder 3. So
you're right, actually.
I know, I am right, actually.
Okay. That's interesting. So let me ask Julia, do you know what you want to hear or see? Or
she wants a pound of flesh. Just making restitution is sort of like sticking out there. She wants that little pound of flesh, don't you?
The thing is, I want the other person to know what they did wrong. And I want them to not so much admit it, but understand why it bothered me. Does that make sense? And of course, it depends on the relationship, and that's important. But if my husband just comes, oh, did I hurt your feelings? Or whatever it is, I'm sorry. Well, what did you do? You know what I mean?
Right.
And I want him to understand why it bothered me and maybe something that he could do next time. Because I'm all about what can I do next time to fix that.
Right. And as with the love languages, many people are bilingual. You may have 2 of these that carry the most weight for you. So I'll run down the other 3. Next is making restitution or making amends. And with that, you offer something that you'd like to do to fix it. And then you ask them the question, is that going to be okay? Is that going to satisfy you? Is there something else that you want to see here? And that's, as Gino mentioned, you could say this is taking their pound of flesh in a sense. We want to know that they're willing to spend their time or their money to make us whole again, right? So for that one, we found 11% of people are waiting for that. And what they're going to say about the first couple of apology languages that I covered is talk is cheap. When they see action, that's when they know that you are sincere. And really, sincerity is a key word. When we listen to someone's apology, what we want to know is, do they really mean it, or are they just trying to get this behind us as quickly as possible?
Yes, I love that.
Well, when you're apologizing, you're accepting responsibility. That's the key word. I think, through our community, everything, life and an amazing life starts with becoming responsible in every facet of your life, whether it's your health, whether it's your fitness, whether it's your faith, whether it's your friends. When you start assuming responsibility for all of your actions and apologies fall within it, all of a sudden you're assuming responsibility and you're taking that next step. So I'm sorry for cutting you off, but that word responsibility is so important to me.
Right. It is key. And also it could be that that's part of your primary apology language, Gino, that really jumps out at you. And I found it interesting to look at different authors who've written about apologizing, like Emerson Eggerich's, I don't know how you say that exactly, who wrote Love and Respect, had 3 parts that are included in any good apology. And so I was certain that at least one of those is his primary apology language. And that's why it sticks out in our head.
Sure.
Now we've got a remaining 15% of people that we want to hit, and they are not satisfied yet with what we've said. So the 4th apology language might do the trick, and that we call plan for change. And that is where we let them know specific steps that we're going to take to prevent a reoccurrence of the problem. And for 12% of people, so fairly large number, they may say, you know what, I forgave you last week, I'll forgive you again today, but I'm going to run out of patience if you keep doing the same thing. So I need for you to put some kind of measures in place, some guardrails, so that you can't keep running us off of the road here.
That sounds like an engineer mind, doesn't it? Where someone's analyzing and they want information, and it's like, that could be tiring for the other spouse to go, wow, I really mean I'm sorry. But as a spouse, you have to be able to listen and to really work with their love language. It's not about you, it's about them. So for those of you out there that may think it's a lot of work, it's worth the extra effort.
Yes. And Gino, your point is really well taken, because as with the love languages, it is about what the recipient wants to receive, right? It's not about what I reflexively always say. I say I'm sorry, I over apologize. It's not about that. It's about what are you waiting to hear? And then our final apology language is actually a question that 3% of people we found are waiting to hear. And that is, will you please forgive me? So to them, you could say all of these other things, and we invite people to think of these as steps to a complete apology. But if you stop with the 4 and then you don't go into the question, will you please forgive me? They may actually feel like you're holding back in some way. And we believe that this one especially is tied to our scripts from childhood. If your parents or your teachers expected you to ask for forgiveness, then you're going to expect that from others.
Can I ask you a couple questions on body language? I think it's really important. And the word of using but. I think that's truly important. Body language, and I'll give you a quick example. One way I'm going to start apologizing to my wife, I'm going to get up to her close and I'm going to start singing opera. I'm singing opera right now. So I'll say, Mamma son tanto felice. So I'll let her start to sing and I'll just be nice and calm. And see, I got to respond. She can't get mad at me if I do that to her. But I think the body language is truly important. But I think the body language is so important, getting in there and those cues. About 10% of communication really is through words. The remainder is through inflection, tone, or body language. Can you dive into that a little bit?
Absolutely. So what I believe about body language is that it can really add to or detract from our apologies. And we're seeing a lot of terrible apologies out there, or really non-apologies being paraded as apologies. And that's what the word but does. We know that it erases what we just said, and then what we really think is about to come out. So we should avoid sounding defensive. You don't want to have your arms crossed when you're giving an apology. You want to have good eye contact. And then you want to stop before you go into those mistakes, those words that are going to qualify your apology or undermine it. But is a big one. Another one is if I did anything to offend you, or if you were offended. People also use to the extent that you were offended.
That's a bad one right there. That's even worse than but. That's like, to the extent that I offended you. It's like you didn't even offend them because there's no extent, right? Wow, that's a tough one. That's a good one.
Well, I analyze public and celebrity apologies, and we find that one often comes from public relations firms, and it's like legalese. It's the cover your butt kind of language that they use, but it's not going to restore any relationship.
Right.
What we need to do is to step forward. My favorite lead-in phrase for an apology is actually this: to say, "I apologize," instead of leading in with "I'm sorry." It's a simple switch. I recommend that people teach their kids the same thing. Lead with "I apologize," because it's disarming and it lets the other person know that you're not there to cast blame on them, but that you are moving into accepting responsibility or whatever language they're waiting to hear. So that gives you a nice base on which you can add the other person's primary apology language. And you don't always have to use all 5. What we recommend, though, is if someone is close to you, if you work with them on a daily basis or live with them, find out what their primary apology language is and be sure that you don't leave that one out.
Mm-hmm. I, again, having children, having my husband who's Italian, as he pointed out earlier.
He's a child.
It's a stubbornness that I feel like people have. It's a stubbornness, but sometimes prideful, where they don't want to admit that they did something wrong, whether it's something they said, something they did, whatever it is, embarrass them in front of people, whatever it is. It's one of those things that we actually have to get out of our own way and say, okay, you know what, this is not about me. This is about us as a family, as a couple, and actually reflect and say, what did I do? And actually admit it to ourselves first, because we can't really fully apologize to someone unless we know what we did wrong, unless we really believe and pay attention to, like, you know what, I shouldn't have said that. And so it takes a person to admit it to themselves. And that's a real challenge for some people. My husband says Italian, but it's in every culture. We're Irish, and it's in the Irish culture.
I can only speak to the Italian culture because I'm only Italian.
Yes. So, and that's, I think, the number one step for most people is to actually say, yes, I did something wrong. And what can you talk to them about? Or even us here that we're sitting here talking, and I'm going to go back to our kids and explain to them when you did something wrong, accept it.
That's right. And it's hard to do that. Often our pride gets in the way. And I think that's where we end up playing the blame game. What I say about blame is that it's like a hot potato that we want to maybe hold just for the second we have to, but then we want to pass it to the person on our left. And they know it's coming. They know, even if they hear a good apology, they're bracing for the but.
Yes.
And that's where we're going to potentially make the mistake of trying to share the blame, or in some other way kind of pass the buck. But what we encourage people to do is to make sure that their apology would stand, even if the other person doesn't meet you halfway. Like, we might wish that they would say, oh, but it was partially my fault too. But make sure, if you are apologizing, that even if they don't say that your apology still stands. Now, another challenge, I believe, is for us to only give sincere apologies. And so we actually want to warn, on the other hand, against apologizing for peace at any price. We talk in the 5 apology languages about the problem of over apologizers. And they actually cheapen their apologies by sort of apologizing just for living.
Yes.
Yeah. I've also heard people who have maybe been confronted about something that they don't remember. They honestly do not remember or do not think it happened that way. And they'll apologize because they value the relationship. But what Gary Chapman and I say is, in that circumstance, we really would encourage you to have a conversation and tell the person how much you value them. And a useful phrase can be saying what you wish. Like, I wish we didn't have this between us. I wish I could go back, roll back time and do it the way you're saying, because that would have been so much more honoring to you. But we actually want to save the words "I apologize" for things that we admit that we did and that we remember that we did. Because otherwise, you're going to end up resenting the other person.
Sure.
That's a tough one for my wife, because she remembers things a lot differently than me. And I think my memory is
her memory is very different. But what I do have now is backup. And that's my kids are older in the house. So like, hold on a second.
You just pay them more. You give them a few more bucks.
I think Mom's right on this one because they're very observant.
Yeah.
Right.
So we do have some. Yeah, we have witnesses all the time.
The witnesses are corrupted. She's paying the witnesses a few bucks. So.
I feed them. And
it's a great segue into children because I mentioned something before we started the recording, and I'm going to ask you another question about when children say, "I'm sorry" to me. That annoys me because it's such a cheap way to say, "Dad, I'm sorry." But do you really mean you're sorry? And are you going to do it 5 minutes later?
We teach them.
Yes.
We always, if you watch parents with little kids,
but I like the word I apologize. I like the word apologize.
But sometimes they don't teach them what they did wrong, and that's where I want to get to. Is that where you were getting?
Well, no, I like that word. Dad, I really apologize for what I did. I'm going to try not to do it again. That follow up. But when somebody says, "Hey, I'm sorry," it really resonates with one of my 5 lines. I don't really believe it. It's not that it's not genuine, but show me the money. Show me the proof that you're not going to do it again. Not a business reference. It's just a movie reference. Got to get business in there a little bit, don't I? So, as far as children, Dr. Jennifer, I think it's really important for all the listeners to hear. The hardest thing for me to do was, my children were getting older, was to apologize to them. And when I truly did something wrong, I didn't want to seem as if I was infallible. And fallibility is probably my middle name. And I do make a lot of mistakes with the kids. And once I started apologizing to them and really sitting them down and saying, "I'm truly sorry. I didn't mean to yell at you. I didn't mean to overreact." It was great. It was a great breakthrough for me. You have any thoughts or any ways to be able to apologize to children?
Well, Gino, I'm glad that you figured it out, that it's important to apologize to our kids when we do things that we wish we hadn't done. And so I do just encourage parents to do a couple of things. One is to apologize to your kids when needed. And the other is to apologize to each other in front of your kids when it's needed, because both are going to really model that skill for them. And then shifting back to teaching the kids to give those apologies, I think it's important to recognize that often when they are told, you got to say you're sorry, they don't mean it. And so I'm often asked, what do I do about the fact that my kids are not sincere when I make them apologize to each other or to me?
You just said it. I make my kids apologize. So it's
that's
forced.
Right.
And that's super important. Yeah.
Yeah, it is forced. And as a psychologist, I believe that we really want to pick winnable battles with our kids and not get into power struggles necessarily with them. And so me saying, you have to say such and so is not always a winnable battle because I cannot make them speak it. So a strategy I used when mine were very young was sign language. And the sign for "I apologize" is a fist rubbed over your heart in a circle.
Yeah.
And so I would give them the option of, can you say "I apologize"? Or, sorry is shorter, so you might want to use that. Can you say "I'm sorry"? Or we'll rub our hand over our heart. And I could either, take their hand and rub it over their heart if they weren't willing, or maybe they were willing to do that motion, even if they weren't willing to say the word. And then when they get old enough to write, sometimes, they're in a foul mood. If they've already gotten in trouble, it could be that they're hungry, they're hangry like the rest of us. And they want to save face. And so another way that I would de-escalate the conflict while making the point was I would allow them to write out the apology words and offer them in writing to the other person, or they could slip it under my door to me. And I was looking for 2 things in this. I didn't make them give all 5 apology languages, but I did expect them to say first what they did wrong, and second, why we have that rule or what's wrong about what they did. So an example would be, "Mom, I apologize that I yelled at you or I told you you were stupid. And then I shouldn't have done that because it's disrespectful."
I like that.
And sometimes just letting them write it out would let us kind of turn the corner. And I would say, "Okay, you can come out of timeout. Let's go fix dinner and move it on," because we don't want to belabor this. What they need is some food.
Yes.
And then those written apologies became things that I could save in my folder. I've got some funny content. Like I remember one time my son wrote, "I'm sorry I called you stupid, Mom, but you should know people don't mean everything they say.
That's awesome. And you said something, humor. And I think that's so important, especially as a mom, lighten up a little bit. You know, our kids, like you said, they're hungry. And when we're hungry, we say things we're not, but imagine being little and not understanding it and just being hungry and not knowing what that means. Exactly. And that's what I've learned as a mom is we need to lighten up a little bit. Yes, they're going to call you really bad things. They're going to do stupid things all the time, but they're learning. They're trying to figure things out. And, us being super strict on every little thing and being on top of them, you have to apologize on that. It becomes overwhelming. And like you said, they grow up and just apologize about everything, about who they are. And that's not healthy either.
Right. Yes. So we need to find the balance. And, that gives you an opportunity to do it without getting stuck in a power struggle, either with them or your partner or coworkers. Yeah, goodness, we don't want to be in power struggles with them. But if we can learn to lead off with, I apologize, and then use as many of the 5 apology languages as fit the situation, hopefully we can be moving these barriers out of the way, because what we know is that these offenses that don't get resolved, they really create a wall between us and other people. And you can sense that the wall is there and that you're not as close as you once were, but it can be hard to talk about this. In fact, I'm so glad that you all have devoted this time to just the topic of apologies. I call them the wallpaper of life. They're like, they're there. We want them. I see them on the news shows almost every day. There's an apology story. It's so interesting. But how often do we really stop and ask people, look, when I apologize to you, what are you waiting to hear? Or you can flip the question and say, when you hear a really bad apology, what's missing? And chances are that their answer is going to let you know what their primary apology language is.
So why do we have that capacity for forgiveness? Because people do horrific things in politics and all, and we say sorry, and we say, okay, we accept your apology. You did a bad thing. Whereas if someone tries to hide the truth and then you find out afterwards, you feel like you've been taken advantage of.
Right. Well, what we say in the lead into our book is that we have an innate desire for justice. You could say it comes from God, or it's in our genes. We want fairness, right? I mean, we hear kids say that. That's not fair.
Yes.
That sticks with us through life. And that's actually a good thing, that we want justice. That's why when we see bully taking someone out, whether it's on the playground or on the national stage, we want to fight for them and say, that's not fair. And so it's great that we know right from wrong. And I just want to encourage parents that it may feel now like you're in the trenches and it's hard to get your kids to accept responsibility. But as you're daily teaching them right from wrong and to accept responsibility and not pass that hot potato, and you're modeling how to apologize, even if not always eliciting the right words from them, what I believe is that over time they mature into it and they will use those skills to help keep their relationships on track.
Yeah. One of the stories I have real quick is we have one of our daughters, Veronica. She's 13 now. When I say stubborn, it's incredible. And I realize now she's never going to let anyone take advantage of her. So I'm actually thankful that she is how she is. But recently we were looking through photo books of, when the kids were little. And I noticed during a Christmas picture, and we all know how hard Christmas pictures are, right? With trying to get everyone in the picture and be smiling. And, and she had her face was clearly, she was sobbing before, and you could see it in the picture. And I looked at her thinking, holy cow, I made her do that. Like, that was my fault because I was giving her such time. This was, 10 years ago. This was a long time ago. And I took the picture to her. I said, Veronica, I'm so sorry. And she looked at me. She's like, for what? And I said, look what I did. Like just to get a photo, I made this big ordeal. You're crying. The other kids are not happy. And I sincerely was, I was almost teary eyed. I was so upset that I was like that, And she's like,
good example.
She's like, Mom, it's okay. And I said, I want you to know that really hurts my heart that I did that to you. And here's the result. And I'm seeing it now 10 years later. And she really appreciated that. She did not expect it. I didn't expect it, but it really helped our relationship. It was so interesting how once I did that, she doesn't even remember it.
Right. That's a great example.
We connected.
Yes. And what I tell people is kids are really quite forgiving. Yeah. I've noticed they're easier to apologize to in some ways than adults because they don't tend to wrap back around and say, and another thing. Yes. They don't pile on. So I just want to invite the listeners to get curious, like, yes, how will my kid respond if I apologize to them? And I'm going to bet that the kid will say, it's okay, and go yes, back to whatever they were doing. They're lovely that way.
I love it.
So this year's Christmas picture, I'm going to wear a shirt with a hole in it, and I'm not going to worry about it. And the kids can have a great time, and you can't get mad at us. I'm going to go back to this show.
I love reality. So I'm going to do the real pictures this time. You know, we're talking about kids in the past and everything. And I kind of want to go into, you know, we all have family drama, right? In our family, everyone, I thought it was just my family until I got married. And then I thought it was just the two of our families. And now I realize
yours is a little more than mine. Let's be realistic. Yours
our Irish just say it out loud. The Italians, it's all a big secret until someone accidentally tells you. It's one of those things where you have a past and you maybe have siblings or your parents, and things have happened over the years, and I've noticed it, and it's killing me to notice how many families are divided by whether it was one incident or the way that you spoke to me or something that happened, and maybe you don't even remember it, but they distance themselves for you over the years more and more, to the point where now everyone is moving in different parts of the country. And there's no connection anymore. There's no family like it used to be, where, maybe it wasn't always like this. It's a little different with the internet now and moving everywhere. But how do you go back and actually restore those relationships with the past when maybe someone's not interested and you are? What do you do in that situation?
Well, I want to lead into this by saying that I think broken relationships are one of the most painful things that we ever endure, especially when, as you said, maybe the other side is not as willing to talk it through as you are. I've been through this a couple of times in my life, and it's very distracting and very upsetting when you feel like, where there's a will, there's a way, but I don't think they have the will to work this out. So I want to speak first to the person who maybe has walked away or thrown up their hands, and to just encourage them to persist in trying to reconnect as long as it's safe to do so. And then how do we have these conversations? I found a useful phrase is to say to someone, I'd like to circle back. I'd like to go back to a time where maybe we had a rough interaction, or it seems like we've been talking less since X and such time. And then express your commitment to them and your affection for them, assuming you still have some. So phrases to lead in with or end with would be, I really value you. I value our relationship. I'm committed to working things out with you through thick and thin. And I don't want to make this uncomfortable, but I'm wondering if I could do something or change the way I act to make it more comfortable between the two of us. So there, what I'm doing is I'm not confronting them. I'm offering myself as someone who's teachable. But that's not our instinct. Our instinct is to say, well, I want to confront this relative or this person about what they did to me. But even if you feel the need to confront, I want people to do it with love and with an understanding that they may feel the same way about you. So are you willing to say, I'm open to hearing what my part is in this. Can you teach me?
That is the hardest thing. I think what you just said is a big deal. And I don't think we realize it. Are we ready to hear what they have to say about us? Because we may have hurt them and we have no idea. And that's why they backed off. But are we ready to hear what we may have done to them all these years? And, that goes back to what we were talking about before, of being stubborn and prideful maybe, and saying, well, I didn't do anything wrong. Or if I did something wrong, I'm sorry, that type of thing. And that, again, it goes back to the awareness of yourself and how important this relationship is.
What if the person doesn't want to apologize, though? Let's say I just don't feel like apologizing. What do you do next?
Yeah, we run into this now and then. There are people who were maybe raised with the belief that if you apologize, you look weak.
Yes.
And people won't respect you. And I just try to reason with them and say, look, think about someone who you respect enormously. Maybe you respect them as an individual. Maybe you respect them in their marriage as well. And if that person made a mistake, do you think they would try to cover it up, or would they somehow acknowledge it and give a good apology? And my guess is that that person would be very quick to apologize, and that after they did so, you would say you actually respect them more and not less. And so I do believe that we can teach old dogs new tricks.
Yeah.
And to the person who's listening, and maybe your apology skills are really rusty, I hope that we've here given you 5 new tools that you can use in order to keep your relationships on track and to keep your love tank full.
I love that. I have one more question, Julie, before we wrap everything
up. I have
up.
100, but I'm not going to do it. I want everyone to buy the book and read the book. I have so many.
Well, you had both mentioned this. And I think this is truly important, this last question, because it's sometimes we're the hardest person to forgive as ourselves. How do we look in the mirror and forgive the person that we're looking at?
That's a great question. I love that.
Right. Yeah, this is so important. In fact, we devoted a chapter to it. How do you forgive yourself? Again, this is one of the most painful things we can experience, is having deep regrets for something that we've either done or not done, and how it has harmed us. And so we talk about going through a process of maybe writing out, or at least saying out loud, an apology to yourself. And then you can also write down or speak words of forgiveness to yourself. And for people who come from a spiritual angle, that might sound like apologizing in like a prayer letter and then receiving words of forgiveness from God. And for someone who's not as spiritual, they can still find benefit in this practice of just trusting their inner self and hearing those words of acceptance. We know that nobody is perfect. Mistakes we make are often just things that we haven't learned yet. And sometimes we need to try again.
I love that.
Dr. Jen, how can the listeners get a hold of you? And if you have any other exciting projects coming out right now as well?
Oh, yes. My co-author, Gary Chapman, and I have teamed up with Paul White for a workplace book that came out in January. It's called Making Things Right at Work. So for those of you who are struggling in the workplace or on Zoom, our subtitle is Increase Teamwork, Resolve Conflict, and Build Trust. So I would point people, in addition to the 5 love languages, to Making Things Right at Work. And people can find me. I'm on Instagram at The Apology Expert. And I'm on Facebook at Jennifer Thomas Author. And finally, I have some free resources and a blog on my website at drjenthomas.com.
I see a part 2 in the future of Making Things Right at Work, a part 2 podcast, because that's going to be the business one, baby.
Yeah, I'm okay with business. I can do it. Yeah.
So since this is the Julia and Gino show, we've transitioned into, I'm going to let you recap this. And then maybe throw a little.
You will throw things in. We know how you are, and I love it. No, Dr. Jennifer, this has been, and I'm not kidding. It's the one of the biggest eye openers for me, because too many times we just teach people, say I'm sorry, accept their apology, and sometimes it just doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel enough. And this book has opened my eyes to, why that is that feeling. And 5 love languages really do help a relationship. And if listeners out there have not gotten it yet, please go get it, because it is unbelievable for the relationships. There's so many of them. You actually have to read all of the books. But this one in particular, like you said in the beginning, it goes together perfectly with the 5 apology languages. It goes together. It's going to deepen everyone's relationship with their spouse, but also with their children and beyond. And it's been such an honor to have you on. And you explained everything so beautifully. So I just want to really thank you for the work that you put in and the time you put in to, making the biggest difference in the world. And I don't think you realize, sometimes we don't realize how we've helped other people so much. And you taking the time to write this book with Dr. Chapman has made a huge impact on so many people. So I just want to thank you for that.
And I think we need to change the golden rule to the platinum rule. Treat others as they would want to be treated, not as you would want to be treated. That's what the whole Chapman series of books does. Try to find out what resonates with them, not what resonates with you. And there's hard work involved with that. Yes. And that goes with the love languages. That goes with the apology languages as well. Just because you want to hear a sorry, how does that person want to hear? Do some work. Yeah. Once you put in the work and you become responsible for your actions, it really is worth it. Yeah. And trust me, I mean, if you're a parent out there, you need to start thinking about taking responsibility, and it's okay to apologize to your children, because you are their role model. If you can't apologize to them and you can't apologize to your spouse in front of them and show them what works and how to do it, how are they going to learn? Are they going to learn outside the home? Are they going to learn the right or the wrong way? Learn how to, this is another skill. This is another tool in the toolbox. Learn how to pull this tool out and learn how to utilize it properly. And let's teach our children how to utilize it.
Exactly. Well, Julia and Gino, this has been such a treat. And how about instead of saying goodbye, I'll say until later.
Until next time.
Yes, please. That. I can't wait.
Yes. Thanks, everybody. We appreciate that, Jennifer. Take care.
Bye.